Hello everybody and welcome to Pixel Politics Explains, a video game feature and video series explaining political and historical ideas and events through video games. Each video will feature a new video game and their political and historical influences. The first video will focus on the hit Xbox game Halo Combat Evolved. Halo is perhaps the most famous Xbox first-party franchise on the planet. Ever since the first Halo, the franchise has been instantly recognisable with gamers and non-gamers alike. But what usually goes missed within video game coverage is how politics and history influences video games. Most notably within the Halo franchise. The Xbox Mega franchise is littered with political and historical influences. This feature will dive into the political and historical influences behind the first Halo game in the series, Halo Combat Evolved. Firstly, it is essential to look at the Halo Combat Evolved's foundational influences. Which political and historical forces are behind the game's backstory and the game's main villains and protagonists. Let's first focus on the political and historical influences behind Halo Combat Evolved's characters. First, let's talk about the franchise's main good guys, the United Nations Space Command, or UNSC. The UNSC is a militarized space force with a primary aim to protect Earth from outer-worldly life. The UNSC, stated by its name, is influenced by the United Nations, or UN, we have today, which is a supranational organisation which currently acts as a facilitator for discussion and action for nation states on an international level. The United Nations does not possess any sovereign control over its state members or countries, but can make policy decisions in what is known as its Security Council, impacting individual nation states. The United Nations is also an incredibly complex organisation with many policy objectives and multifaceted goals. To name but a few, the United Nations seeks to eradicate global poverty, promote environmental sustainability, and promote peace on an international scale. However, it lacks any real enforcement mechanisms to promote peace, having no army to stop conflict when it occurs. Therefore, it acts as a mediator in state conflict and interstate conflict, helping to bring about resolution in a peaceful, non-violent way. In contrast, its video game counterpart, the UNSC, has its militarized power the current United Nations does not possess. It is clear Bungie, the developers of the original Halo franchise and the game, took influence from the UN as this near sovereign entity above the state level, and expanded the idea of the UN to create the UNSC with near sovereign like capabilities, for example as a world government. It is this world government that scholars of international relations have discussed for decades. They argue it is seemingly unlikely due to the vast differences between nation states, not only domestically, but also in how they carry out foreign policy, making a world government nearly near impossible to construct. Nevertheless, it is interesting to see how Bungie has taken influence from the UN and expanded its role within Halo as the UNSC with this world government style power. Likewise, on the side of the good guys, you have the Master Chief, the main protagonist of the franchise, or otherwise known as John 117. The Master Chief is a genetically engineered super soldier, destined to protect Earth from the extraterrestrial threat that is the Covenant, or the evil guys. From the outset of the game, you can see the clear influences the Master Chief has from entertainment culture, such as from the famed Marvel super soldier Captain America, but the political influences go far deeper than that. Captain America was actually used as propaganda to boost American morale during World War II and contributed to this war effort. In this sense, the Master Chief is taking influence from being that super soldier figure destined to save humanity and acts as a means of hope to the people of Earth, boosting their morale. Thus, it's taking deep-rooted influence from characters such as Captain America, therefore having strong political and historical ties from eras such as World War II through boosting morale such as during a war effort. As you can see, there are direct comparisons there. Halo Combat Evolved also has one main villain sector called the Covenant. The Covenant has strong political and historical influences, but these are more skewed towards religion. The Covenant is a political, militarized and religious organization made up of various in-game alien races. Covenant quickly comes into contact with the human race and the UNSC, leading to war. The Covenant is a profoundly religious organization, hence the name Covenant, which literally means relating to God or the relationship of people to God. The organization worships the Forerunners, a godlike entity in the eyes of the Covenant. Thus, its influences are heavily religious, steeped in some form of biblical history. Similarly, the structure of the organization is what we call theocratic. Theocratic hegemony, or what theocracy or theocraticness is based on, is the supreme power of the rule of God in government. Multiple religious leaders control the Covenant and make these decisions in the Covenant through theocratic means, with the whole aim of using what they call the Halos, which were originally built by the Forerunners, to transcend to the afterlife and achieve divinity. Theocracy is a system of government both found in the contemporary world and the past. Historically, states such as Japan before the Second World War and imperial cults such as the Roman Empire and the ancient Egyptians had theocratic elements. There are several religious entities with theocratic characteristics today, such as the Vatican City and the Iranian state in contemporary times. Theocracy, or the ultimate rule of God in government, has influenced the creation of the Covenant. The Covenant uses these theocratical elements and is therefore profoundly historically, religious and politically influenced from this governmental system throughout the ages. Now let's move on to the political and historical influences of the Halo Combat Evolved backstory. The Halo Combat Evolved backstory is a vast one and has significant political and historical influences. Years before the events of Halo Combat Evolved, the UNSC faced several insurgencies. These came from fascist and communist organisations that sought to defeat the UNSC due to unrest on Earth as a result of overpopulation. Evidently, as a result from the start, the background of Halo has had these political and historical influences. They are seemingly derived from the Cold War and the nuclear arms race between the US and the USSR or Soviet Union. More specifically, the race to put satellites into space and militarize them through the Soviet Union's Sputnik programs and the US launch of its satellites. Due to the inclusion of a communist organisation in the backstory of the game versus a US-based UNSC, who are both trying to expand influence into space. Thus, there are apparent political and historical ties to this Cold War era present in the game. After this period in the Halo timeline, humans expanded their reach into the Milky Way, eventually developing the Spartan programs, as mentioned. Unfortunately, they discover the theocratic Covenant. The Covenant quickly overpowers the humans, leading to Halo's eventual discovery by Spartan John 117, or Master Chief. This starts the Halo Combat Evolved story. Now let's talk about the political and historical influences behind the plot of Halo Combat Evolved. After discovering the Halo, which is a ring-shaped structure in the size of a planet, Master Chief and the UNSC allies seek to find out what the Halo is and why the Covenant are so interested in it. Master Chief quickly realizes the Halo is of significance to the Covenant and is a super weapon. The idea of a super weapon, as we know, has been represented across popular culture in various ways. For example, the planet-destroying Death Star in Star Wars. George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, took direct influence from the Cold War during its conception. More specifically, the nuclear-powered superweapons that threatened world peace during the era. Thus, the idea of Halo, a superweapon with tremendous power, evidently takes influence politically and historically from Cold War super weapons. After this, once the Master Chief has discovered details about the weapon, both the UNSC and the Covenant accidentally release a parasitic life form called the Flood. The Flood takes, hence its name, biblical reference from the Great Flood in the story of Noah's Ark, thus taking influence from history in terms of deep Christian beliefs. The plot quickly develops with the Master Chief having to destroy the ring after the ring's defense systems are activated. The protagonists rapidly find out that once the defense systems are activated, all life will be wiped out, as the Halo's sole purpose is to destroy the Flood if it ever spreads. From looking at the overall plot, a common theme emerges. The Master Chief is in a race against time to save humanity from Halo. Thus it seems Halo Combat Evolved is taking heavy influences from the Cold War and the immense fear and uncertainty surrounding nuclear weapons during that period. As a result, Halo Combat Evolved is heavily influenced historically and politically by the Cold War era. Now let's conclude. Overall, Halo Combat Evolved is politically and historically influenced by a myriad of historical and political influences, from the Cold War era to contemporary global politics and religious influences spanning many historical ages. Halo Combat Evolved is a great game and the perfect entry point to the Halo franchise. Give it a play if you haven't. You might fall in love with the franchise, and watch out for the political and historical influences present in the game. You might find some I missed. Thank you for watching and enjoy this new feature series.